Today, we are diving deep into a really tricky topic, performance measurement and management, specifically in the public sector. Welcome to our fun little study group for PP 5340, Introduction to Public Policy and Management. Think of this as our session covering the readings from Section 12, all about performance measurement and management. We're going to tackle a huge question. How do we actually know if government is doing a good job? So, let's get into it. So let's start with a really simple idea. To improve government, you've got to measure it, right? I mean, it seems so obvious. If you can't measure it, how can you possibly manage it? But as we're about to see from our readings, this super simple idea is actually packed with hidden dangers and some pretty wild paradoxes. All right, so here's our game plan. First up, we're going to define the core problem, what researchers call the performance paradox. Then we're going to put a few different solutions on trial, looking at some real-world case studies. After that, we'll pull it all together and figure out what actually makes measurement work. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with the big takeaway for you as a public manager. All right, let's kick things off with the big one, the performance paradox. This is really the heart of the problem, the thing that makes a seemingly good idea so incredibly tricky. So to really get this, we've got to jump in the time machine and head back to the 1980s. A paper by Sandra Van Thiel and Franz Lee explains that this is when this huge movement called New Public Management, or NPM, really took off. The idea was simple, really. Make government run more like a business. Bring in private sector techniques like performance indicators to track results and boost efficiency. But as you might guess, it wasn't that simple. Researchers like Peter Smith and again Van Thiel and Leeuw started noticing some really serious unintended side effects. Things like tunnel vision, where an agency gets so focused on the one thing being measured that they ignore everything else that's important. Or measure fixation, where just hitting the target number becomes the whole point, not the actual mission. And then there's something called cream skimming. This is where agencies might cherry pick the easiest cases to work on just to make their stats look good. And all of this leads us right to the heart of the matter, the performance paradox. Basically, it's this weird phenomenon where, over time, the numbers you're tracking, the performance indicators, can stop having anything to do with actual performance. The dashboard might be all green, but the service itself could be stagnating or even getting worse. What you measure just isn't what you're getting anymore.
And wow, this quote from Van Thiel and Leeuw's work just hits the nail on the head. They talk about a USA Today survey on education. The government introduced standards, tied them to funding, and what happened? Some teachers started helping their students cheat. The schools got obsessed with the tests. The goal completely shifted from educating kids to just passing the test. The indicator literally became the mission, and the real purpose just got lost in the shuffle.
Okay, so if just slapping some metrics on everything is so dangerous, what's the alternative? That brings us to Section 2. Solutions on trial. We're going to look at 4 different attempts to solve this whole mess, pulling from our other readings. And first up, we've got this really cool compare and contrast. We're looking at 2 different studies of the exact same industry, city buses, but they're separated by 27 years. The first one, from way back in 1986, is all about privatization. The second, from 2013, shifts the focus to management itself. So back in 1986, James Perry and Timlin Babitsky did this study, and it really shows you the thinking at the time. They found that, fully private bus companies were more efficient. But here's the kicker. When a public agency just hired a private company to manage the service, there was 0 efficiency gain. None. So the early conclusion was, okay, maybe ownership is what matters, but just contracting out isn't some magic bullet. Okay, now let's jump forward 27 years to 2013. Theodore Poister and his team looked at the same industry, but they asked a different question. Instead of just ownership, they looked at specific management practices, and what they found was a game changer. Agencies that had formal strategic plans and really used performance measurement systems had better outcomes, like more people riding the bus. And it didn't matter if they were public or private. The thinking had totally shifted. It's not about who owns the buses, it's about how you manage the system. So that idea of systematic management leads us right into our third attempt, which we can call the toolkit thesis. If good management is the secret sauce, well, what does that actually look like? A report from John Maleyeff gives us a very specific, hands-on answer. Maleyeff is a big proponent of a framework called Lean Six Sigma, and specifically this 5-step method, DMAIC. Think of it like a recipe for fixing things. First, you define the problem. Then, you measure how things are working right now. You analyze the data to find the root cause.
Then you improve the process with some smart solutions. And finally, and this is key, you control the new process to make sure you don't slide back into old habits. It's a structured, repeatable way to get better.
Okay, but does this kind of corporate-sounding toolkit actually work in the real world of government? Well, John Maleyeff's report gives us a killer example from Fort Wayne, Indiana. They use this exact approach to tackle pothole repairs. And get this, they cut the average repair time from 4 days all the way down to just 3 hours. I mean, that is a massive, tangible improvement that people can actually see. All right, that brings us to our fourth and final potential solution. The incentives thesis. This one is super direct. It basically asks, if you want certain results, why not just pay for them? So, a study by Margaret Commons and her team looked at this really interesting experiment in Maine. They had a performance contracting system for substance abuse treatment. Now, the state didn't just pay clinics for providing services. No, they tied the funding directly to client outcomes. The result? It actually worked. Providers got better at hitting key goals like helping clients stay sober and reduce their drug use. It's a powerful lesson. Directly connecting the money to the results can be a huge lever for change. All right, so we've looked at the big, scary paradox, and then 4 really different attempts to solve it. Let's shift gears now to our third section and try to pull all the lessons from these readings together. What does it actually take to make measurement work? When you step back and look at all of these studies, a few key success factors really jump out. First, from Maleyeff's work, it's clear that leadership commitment has to be there. We're talking active, involved leadership. It's totally non-negotiable. Then, from Thiel and Leeuw, we get the lesson about having balanced indicators. You need multiple, different kinds of metrics to avoid that dangerous tunnel vision. The transit study from Poister and his team really hammered home the need for clear goals and a formal strategy to keep everyone focused. Maleyeff also highlights the importance of building trust, specifically guaranteeing that making things more efficient won't cost people their jobs. That's huge for getting everyone on board. And finally, you see this in all the success stories. They didn't just obsess over the final number. They focused on systematically analyzing and improving the actual day-to-day work process. Okay, let's wrap this up. What's the final takeaway? What's the big picture for all of us as current or future public managers? I think if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. Performance management is not some simple technical fix. You can't just buy some software, create a dashboard, and call it a day. It is a deeply complex, managerial, and honestly, a cultural challenge. At the end of the day, success really depends on how you lead and manage people and processes, not just on the numbers you choose to track. And so that leaves us with a really important question to chew on. As a future public manager, you are going to be under constant pressure for accountability, for data, for results. So the challenge for you is this. How will you balance that very real need with the equally real risk of accidentally creating a performance paradox in your own organization? That, right there, is the tightrope we're all going to have to walk. Thanks for joining our study session.